Good afternoon, you guys. Fun fact, do not have anybody in this class at the moment. So I am just gonna talk to my computer for a couple hours. Welcome on board the ride. Our last lecture, we talked about the endocrine system. So we covered the major glands of the body, the hormones that those glands produced, some of the major effects that those hormones have on the body, and we covered the pathologies of the endocrine system, which again are usually the overproduction or the underproduction of some hormone by a gland. So today we are going to move on in this section. We are going to be talking about the urinary system today. We are also going to talk about the reproductive system. These systems in your textbooks are both very short, so we're going to take both of them and combine them into one lecture. So we are going to get started in your Beck books on page 277. Urinary system starts on a page, it looks just like this. Now, the function of the urinary system is to rid the bloodstream of particular toxins and make sure that those toxins are filtered out and removed from the body. This is done by urination. So the first thing I want you to highlight is the very first sentence. The urinary system includes 2 kidneys, one on each side, 2 ureters. The ureters are tubes that link the kidneys to the 1 bladder and 1 urethra. That is your pee tube. That's the tube that pee comes out of. So with our urinary system, we have 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, tubes coming from the kidneys, 1 bladder, and 1 urethra. The kidneys filter toxins and waste products out of the blood. Those waste products are mixed with, not important, they're mixed with other things. They are transported through the ureter, they are stored in the bladder, and then they are released through the urethra. The kidneys are bean-shaped organs. They are actually kidney bean-shaped. That's where kidney beans get their name from. They are kidney-shaped organs located at the back of the abdominal cavity. So they are on the posterior aspect, on the upper aspect of your lumbar spine, right anterior to your 11th and 12th ribs. Lost my place. The kidneys are an efficient blood filtration system. That is, their whole function is to filter the blood. The functional unit of the kidney is known as a nephron. A nephron the functional unit of the kidney. So this word part, neph or nepher or nephro, always refers to the kidneys. So let's say you had a kidney problem and you had to go to a doctor that specialized in kidney issues. That doctor would be a nephrologist, right? The study of the kidneys is nephrology. Most famous television nephrologist that you guys have probably heard of, Dr. House. Yeah, Dr. House from House. His specialty in the show is diagnostics, but diagnosing is not a medical specialty for real. That was like for the TV show. In the story, his medical specialty was nephrology. He was a kidney doctor. So down towards the bottom of that section on page 277, I do want you to highlight there are 2 to 3 million nephrons in the kidneys. Each day, the nephrons filter 40 to 50 gallons of plasma from the blood. 99% of this fluid is reabsorbed into the bloodstream. Still highlighting. The kidneys excrete the remaining water and waste products through the ureters, which again are these tubes that lead from the kidneys to the bladder. As the kidneys filter the blood, they remove a certain amount of water and nitrogenous waste products of metabolism. So these waste products are things like urea, uric acid, ammonia, certain drugs will be excreted through the urinary system. The ureters are tubes that carry urine from the kidneys to the bladder where the urine is stored. Still highlighting here. The bladder is a hollow organ constructed of walls of elastic fibers and involuntary muscle. It acts as a reservoir for the urine until it is excreted from the body. When the bladder accumulates about a pint of urine, Sensors indicate that it is time to urinate. Now, stop highlighting right there. A couple of things. Number one, a pint. What does this mean to us? How much is a pint? Flash back to like elementary and middle school. You remember those little milk cartons that they would give you? That's about a pint. That's roughly a pint. Now, when we say that the bladder is constructed of elastic fibers, remember the protein elastin gives things that ability of elasticity, right? They stretch and then they snap back to their original shape. So the bladder will stretch as it fills with urine, but as we urinate and once we have voided the bladder, it will return to its original size. The third thing I wanted to mention is that it is it's created of walls of smooth muscle. Remember, smooth muscle is involuntary. We don't have control over it. So once you begin to urinate, these muscles contract, squeezing the bladder without your conscious control, which pushes urine out of the system. Sensors that indicate it is time to urinate. If we think back to the muscular system, we talked about organs like the Golgi tendon organ or the muscle spindle cells that are tracking how stretched or contracted the muscle is so that we prevent injury to the muscle or to the joint. We use the same kind of receptors in the bladder. They detect how stretched the walls are, and once they reach a certain limit, they send a signal to the brain, it is time to urinate. That is when you get like the feeling that you have to pee. Voiding or emptying the bladder is accomplished by a voluntary relaxation of a sphincter muscle and an involuntary contraction of the smooth muscles of the bladder. So there are two phases going on. We've got the voluntary and the involuntary. The voluntary sphincter muscle is the one that we are trained to use when we are being potty trained. So we are training our kids from like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, right? You go to the toilet when you feel you have to pee, right? You don't just go in your pants. What you are developing here is control of the voluntary sphincter. Now, once we get control of this, or if you don't have control of it, when the sensors indicate it is time to urinate, the involuntary muscles of the walls of the bladder begin to contract. These involuntary muscles, which you do not have control over, squeeze the bladder, pushing urine out. So, as the bladder contracts, urine passes through the urethra and out of the body. The length of the urethra is a little bit dependent on your biological sex. For a female, the urethra is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 inches long. For a male, it could be 3 to 12 inches long, just depending on how blessed you are. So there we go. All right, moving on to the next paragraph, I do want you to highlight a urinalysis is a chemical examination of the urine that is often a part of the routine examination given by most physicians. Remember, your blood is being filtered, right? So if any of you guys have a swimming pool or have ever used a swimming pool, you know the pool has a filter, right? So that any leaves or stuff that are swimming in the pool, they all get pulled into the filter. If anything is swimming in your bloodstream, if your kidneys filter it out, it will end up in the kidney. It will then end up in your urine. So by testing the urine, we can detect the presence of certain chemicals like illicit drugs. If any of you guys have ever had to take a urinalysis test, like a drug test, or we can also check the urine to detect for certain health problems. One of the two that come to the top of my mind would be type 1 diabetes. A diagnostic sign of type 1 diabetes is having glucose, a sugar, in your urine. Sugar in your urine means you have sugar in the blood. Sugar in your blood means it's not being taken into a cell, which means you are not producing insulin, which is required to get sugar into a cell. The second example that comes to my mind is a condition in pregnancy known as toxemia, which is indicated by elevated amounts of protein in the urine. Toxemia often will resolve once the pregnancy comes to an end. But that's the way they diagnose you with toxemia. They do a urinalysis, you got protein in the blood, they diagnose you with toxemia. So proteins, sugars, drugs, Many legitimate medical drugs are metabolized through the kidneys, so you could detect the presence of those drugs in the urine as well. But checking out the urine is a good part of any normal physical. The presence of white blood cells or blood or glucose or other chemicals in the urine could be an indication of a metabolic imbalance or an infection or other numerous conditions. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. The point is we can test the urine for certain substances, and the presence of those substances will indicate some kind of medical condition. Normal, healthy urine is a clear yellowish color. Now, if you are well hydrated, it will be more on the clear side. If you are less hydrated, it will be more on the yellow side. But urine should have some amount of a yellow color. Now, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but the color of your urine can actually tell you a great deal about the health of the individual. Some of the key colors that we want to be aware of, probably the most important and the one that I would tell you first is orange. If you have orange urine, you need to see a physician. If we think back to like color mixing and the color wheel and things like that, if you have, we have Roy G. Biv, colors of the rainbow, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. If urine is yellow, but your urine is coming out as orange, this tells me that the urine is being mixed with something red, right? Red and yellow mixed to make orange. So if your urine is orange, what is mixing with your urine? What is red in the body? Well, if you answered blood, you got the answer correct. Blood in your urine is not a good sign, you guys. Blood should always be inside a blood vessel. It should never just be roaming around the body willy-nilly. So if you have blood in your urine, this could indicate kidney damage, like kidney disease or kidney cancer. This could be an ulcer or some kind of damage inside the bladder itself. This could be some kind of damage to the urethra. You would need to see a physician and get more tests run to know exactly where the problem is. Probably on the more urgent side would be kidney disease or kidney cancer. On the lesser side, you may have an ulcer or some kind of bladder infection or a UTI, but you need to be put on antibiotics, because if you're bleeding in here, that means that it is open to infection. And despite what a lot of people may tell you, what you may hear on the internet or whatever, urine is not sterile. It's not sterile. So if there are bacteria living in here and you are bleeding, the bacteria could get into the bloodstream, spreading the infection throughout. So orange urine indicates the presence of blood. You need to see a physician. Another common color, well, I wouldn't say common, but another color of note would be brown. Brown urine is another indicator that you need to see a physician. Brown urine indicates liver failure. So the liver is not metabolizing or dealing with bile the way that it should be. So a lot of that bile is breaking down into a compound called bilirubin. And the bilirubin is being filtered by the kidneys and excreted through the urinary system. Bilirubin is the material that makes your poop brown. So when you find it in the urine also turns brown. This does not mean you have feces in your urine. These are two separate systems. They do not cross over with each other. But the material that gives feces its brown color could also be present in the urine, giving urine a brown color. This is something that requires a physician. You need a liver doctor, a hepatologist, to look at your liver. Another issue with the kidneys that can be very common is green urine. This one usually does not have any negative side effects. Green urine is usually the result of your diet. You've probably been eating a lot of green something or other, like a lot of green leafy vegetables. Asparagus is one of the more common culprits. But you may also have eaten something that had a lot of green artificial food coloring. So if you ate like a big St. Patrick's Day cake and it was all like green cake with green icing and green frosting and all the green sprinkles and everything, don't be shocked if you pee a little bit of green afterwards. Green is not usually an issue. It's usually chlorophyll from the plants or the green food coloring that you're excreting. I would say red and brown would be the more troublesome ones. You want to make an appointment with a doctor to have that checked out. But Again, a change in the color of the urine, like a reddish or a brownish, could indicate an infection or other problems. So even without doing a urinalysis, just observing the color of the urine can also tell you something about the health of their urinary system and the health of the individual overall. So please make sure you highlighted the sentence about a urinalysis. Please make sure you also highlight the sentence, normal healthy urine is a clear yellowish color. Now, the kidneys also function to maintain the body's water balance. So another function of the kidneys is to produce the hormone renin. Renin acts to regulate blood pressure, and this is the one that is thrown off when people are eating too much sodium in their diet. They have too much salt in their diet. That's why people that have high blood pressure, they are put on a low sodium diet. It's to modulate the kidneys' production of the hormone renin, which messes with your blood pressure. When the blood pressure is low, the kidneys are stimulated to release more renin into the bloodstream to up the blood pressure. This causes blood vessels to contract. They get smaller, thereby raising the blood pressure. Now, when we talk about blood vessels getting smaller and pressure rising, just give you a little sample real quick, something you've probably seen in real life. This is the opening to my garden hose. And when I turn the water on full blast, the water comes out of the full hole in the end of my garden hose. The water will spray out something like that, right? Now, if I put my thumb over the end of the garden hose, right? So we block off a large portion of this opening. Now I only have a small amount that is available for the water to exit through. I have narrowed the opening or constricted the vessel. Now, what happens to the water that is spraying out? When you reduce the opening, you increase the pressure. So the water will travel out much farther. This is the same principle that happens with the blood vessels. So as the blood vessels constrict, the act of constricting, of narrowing the vessel, increases the blood pressure. The hormone renin is responsible for this. This is why the kidneys can affect blood pressure. This is why putting them on a low sodium diet to reduce the production of renin is one of the recommended treatments for high blood pressure. So, all right. Well, that has been the urinary system. That took less than 30 minutes. But this entire system is like one page in your back book. So I really don't have much else that I could really drag this out for. So please make sure that you are aware of the parts of the urinary system, right? Kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. Know the functional unit of the kidney. That again was a nephron. So nephrology or nephrologist or nephritis, always going to be related to a kidney. Kidney doctor, study of kidneys, inflammation of a kidney. There are 2 to 3 million nephrons per kidney. 2 to 3 million in each kidney. So you would have 4 to 6 million nephrons total. The actual nephron is pictured here. I do not need you to know all the ins and outs of this thing. I just want you to know what a nephron is. I do not need you to know all the parts of it. Suffice it to say, it is an extremely complicated system. It's a complicated system that pulls blood into very narrow vessels and loops them through with another web, a series of collecting vessels, which pulls material out. Everything that's left over is urine. But the nephron, that's what I want you to know. All right. Bladder is made of elastic vessels and involuntary smooth muscle. Urination is a combination of the voluntary relaxing of the sphincter. That is what you have control over. That is what you are clenching when you have to hold it, right? When you don't have a bathroom around and you got to just hold it, you are clenching the voluntary muscle against the involuntary contraction of the muscles in the bladder. So you've got involuntary muscle squeezing, a voluntary muscle squeezing, and the two are battling it out. That's when you're like twisting your legs around and doing your little pee dance. Now, when you get to the toilet, you relax the sphincter, the involuntary muscle continues contracting, we squeeze out the bladder, urine ends up in the toilet. A urinalysis is the chemical examination of urine. The chemicals present in urine can tell us a lot about the health of an individual, as well as the color. Urine should be a clear yellowish color. Any other color that you see could be cause for concern. Red and brown are the two ones you want to be strongest on the lookout for, but green is another color. Green is usually not an issue. It's usually related to what you've been eating. All right, there's your recap. That is everything I have for the urinary system. Any questions?
No questions.
Adrian joined in.
I was gonna say, it sounded like Adrian.
Yeah. Adrian, we have some guest stars here in class today.
Hello.
Hey,
How are you?
pretty good. How about you guys?
Good.
He's been doing
That's
awesome, you guys. Adrian's been doing awesome.
Yay.
Glad you joined.
Super proud of him. He's been in all my lectures.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we are going to move on to our next topic. Again, I'm combining these two because they're both really short sections. And I honestly, if I tried, I could not stretch urinary system out 2 hours. I mean, it's a page worth of material. So we're going to move on to the human reproductive system. We're on page 280. So we are going to be looking at the parts and functions of the male reproductive system, the female reproductive system, and what happens during a normal pregnancy. So I'm going to go ahead and get this out there, out in the open. We are talking about the human reproductive system. I will be saying words like penis and vagina a lot over the next couple of minutes. Go ahead and get all your laughs out. Go ahead and laugh it up. Get it out of your system because it's not going to stop until we're done with the section. So. All right. The reproductive system is the generative apparatus that is necessary for organisms to reproduce other organisms of the same kind, the same species, and ensure the continuation of their species. Lower forms of life, like single-celled organisms, like a lot of bacteria, reproduce asexually. They do not need a partner. They take all of their genetic information, they make an exact copy of it, and they send one copy to each end of the cell. The cell then splits into two. So each cell gets a full copy of the DNA, and bibbidi-bobbidi-boo, we now have a parent and a daughter cell. They do not need a partner to do this, but the drawback to this method of reproduction is without the genetic input of a partner, all of the daughter cells through the entire line will have identical DNA. So if there is a disease or something that spreads through the population, if there is no DNA variation, then one disease can wipe out the entire population. Sexual reproduction has proven to be the most effective method because sexual reproduction requires a partner. This implies that there is variation to choose from, right? If all partners look the same, then it's not really a choice, right? But if you prefer redheads and I prefer brunettes, there is variation in the population. This variation produces offspring that are also varied. So if there is a disease in the population or some kind of massive change in the environment, some individuals, because of their variations, could be more prone to surviving, whereas other populations are not prone to surviving. They will die out. The survivors will go on and reproduce and spread those same genes that allowed them to survive in the first place. This is how nature selects who lives and who dies. It's all a game of making it to reproduction. This is what we talk about this is what we mean when we talk about natural selection and evolution. Nature can only select for variants that give some kind of benefit. If a variation does not benefit you, it will keep you from reproducing or keep you from living, right? Certain mutations, you die. Those mutations do not get passed on. Other mutations will increase your chances of survival. Because you survived, you're more likely to reproduce, and now your kids have those same genes that helped you survive. So they will also be likely to survive and pass those genes on. Now, asexual reproduction is only done in lower forms of life, mostly single-celled organisms. There are very, very few larger, like macro-sized organisms that can reproduce asexually. Sexual reproduction has been the name of the game for like a lot of millions of years. Now, in humans and in most multicellular organisms, reproduction is sexual and it requires a male and a female, each having specialized sex cells. Before we jump into this real quick, I would just like to make a note of something because humans are weird and we do a lot of weird stuff. I want to draw a distinction between sex and gender. Sex is in your genes. It is biological. There is no changing it. It's what's in your pants. It's what's between your legs, right? Sex, you are male or female, and then a few individuals, rare mutations may be intersexed where you have both, but the rule is male or female, right? You have testes or you have ovaries. This is biological sex. Gender, on the other hand, is a different concept entirely. Gender is a societal thing. This is a thing that we do in society. Gender is a performance. You perform your gender based on your clothing, the activities you perform in, the accessories you put on your body, like earrings or makeup or fingernail polish, the way you wear your hair, the way you carry yourself, the way you present yourself to people. Gender is a performance. Sex is biological. So when I am talking about things like male and female, I am only referring to biological sex. I am not referring to gender. So when we talk about issues like someone being transgendered or someone being gender non-conforming or non-binary, that is a sociological phenomenon. That is not what I am talking about here today. Today, I am talking about biological sex. I'm talking about the cells involved in sexual reproduction, the organs involved in sexual reproduction. I am saying nothing about the performance of gender. This topic is about the biological sex. So, lower forms of life reproduce asexually. In humans and most multicellular organisms, reproduction is sexual and requires a male and female, each having specialized sex cells. Highlight. A gamete is the term used to describe a reproductive cell that can unite with another gamete to form the cell or zygote that develops into an embryo. So when we say gamete, gametes are the sex cells, the cells that can unite to become another person. For males, we are talking about sperm. For females, we are talking about an egg, or the technical name, ovum. The technical name for a sperm cell is a spermatozoa, because of course it is. In males, these cells are spermatozoa. In the female, the ovum. Now, when a sperm and an egg come together, we have one cell, a fertilized ovum. That is known as a zygote. So a zygote is a cell, one cell, formed by the union of two gametes. A sperm and an egg, two cells, come together. They make one cell, the zygote. A zygote is the fertilized ovum, the cell formed by the union of a spermatozoa with an ovum. A gonad is the sex gland that produces the reproductive sex cells. So the gland in males that produce sperm are the testes. The gland in women that produce the ovum is the ovaries. So the glands, testes and ovaries, produce gametes, sperm and eggs. Gametes come together, one pair, one sperm and one egg, to produce a zygote, the fertilized egg. In the human female, the gonad is, keep highlighting, sorry, we're still highlighting. In the human female, the gonad is the ovary. In the human male, it is the testes. We stop highlighting there. It is not within the scope of this book to describe in detail the entire process of human reproduction. What we are getting into today is just a brief summary. So we start with the male, just because that's what they did first in the book. So the functions of the male reproductive system are the production of sperm, the production of the male hormones, chiefly androgens and testosterone, and the performance of the sex act. Highlight. The reproductive system in men includes 2 testes, 2 vas deferens, 2 seminal vesicles, 1 prostate gland, bulbourethral glands, also known as Cowper's glands, you have multiples of those, and the penis. Pause highlighting. The male gonads are located outside the body in a pouch situated at the base of and beneath the penis called the scrotum. Highlight. The testes are 2 small egg-shaped glands made up of minute convoluted tubules called seminiferous tubules, where the sperm cell is produced in a process known as spermatogenesis. Pause highlighting there, and now I'm going to back up a second. I'm going to unpack some of this stuff. All right, male gonads are the testes. They are located in a pouch outside the body, that is the scrotum. There is a reason that our sex glands are outside the body and women's sex glands are inside the body. Sperm cells require a very narrow temperature window in order to form properly. They cannot get too hot, they cannot get too cold. If they are held within the body and they stay at body temperature, right, at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, that's actually too hot for them. So what we do is we store them just outside the body, and they're kind of on these like retractable cords. So we can pull them up into the body or we could lower them down further from the body. This is why men, you ever notice that we tend to hang a little lower when we're hot? That is because as the body temperature rises, we need the testicles to be held further away from the body so we don't overcook our little kids. So we lower the testes when we get too hot. Now, what if we get too cold? Well, if you've ever seen Seinfeld, right? I was in the pool, there was shrinkage. That is a real phenomenon because as the outside of the body gets cold, like when you run outside in your underwear in the winter or you jump into a cold pool of water, suddenly these babies are getting way too cold for sperm production. So we pull up on those cords, we pull them suckers in closer to the body so that the temperature remains constant. Those guys will be raised and lowered multiple times throughout the day, always trying to keep them at this narrow temperature window. It's usually going to be somewhere between 92 and 94 degrees Fahrenheit, but you don't need to know that. I'm just telling you why they go up and down. Now, testes are 2 small egg-shaped glands made up of minute, which means very, very, very small, convoluted tubules. Convoluted means these guys just twist around. There is no rhyme or reason or pattern. It is bizarre, and they just twist randomly all around each other. Tiny, tiny, tiny little tubes, all bundled into this one egg-shaped testes. And then you have 2 of them. Now within these little tiny tubes, which are called seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous means they're related to sperm or semen, and tubules is a fancy word. It means a really, really tiny tube. So the seminiferous tubules are the semen-related little teeny tiny tubes. This is where the sperm cell is produced. The process of producing sperm is known as spermatogenesis, with the ending genesis literally meaning the beginning or the creation of. So the scientific name for the production of sperm is a fancy word that literally translates to the production of sperm. Okay, spermatogenesis takes place in the tubules as specialized stem cells near the outer membrane divide to produce cells called words are still hard for me, and I finished my coffee. Primary spermatocytes, primary sperm cells. These cells undergo cellular reduction division called meiosis and become secondary spermatocytes where their genetic information is divided in half. In humans, the 46 chromosomes have been halved to 23. Now let me talk about this for a second. when we learned about the cell, back in the beginning, we talked about the cell. We said that cells undergo a cycle of reproduction known as mitosis. Okay? When a cell undergoes mitosis, the entire genome, the whole DNA, is duplicated and divided amongst the two daughter cells. So each cell gets a complete copy of the DNA, the whole book. They get the whole book, right? Mitosis is for your body cells. Sex cells or gametes, right? Eggs and sperm, these guys are different. They have to do a different function, so they do things a little bit differently. Meiosis is a form of reproduction, but with mitosis, the daughter cells each had complete copies of the DNA. Meiosis does not do this. When primary spermatocytes divide into two daughter cells, they only get half of the genetic information. They only get half of the book. Why do they only get half of the book? Because the sperm provides half, the egg provides half. So when the two come together to form a zygote, now the zygote has one complete version of DNA. Half is from the father, half is from the mother. So meiosis is a form of cellular division, but it only happens in gametes. Only sperm and ova go through this process of reproduction. Every other cell in your body, muscle, blood, connective, nervous, all of it, they undergo mitosis. Each daughter cell gets a complete copy of the DNA. Only sex cells go through meiosis. So, the secondary spermatocytes undergo another division so that the original cell becomes 4 spermatids that soon develop into mature sperm cells or spermatozoa. So, primary Sorry. So here's the primary spermatozoa. Primary spermatozoa will have all the DNA. Then we undergo meiosis. This gives us 2 daughter cells. Each gets half. Now, these guys will each divide, copying the half fully. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of these 4 will only have half of the genetic information overall. So, primary spermatocyte leaves us with a grand total of 4 spermatids. Each spermatid will develop into a fully fledged sperm cell. And again, each sperm cell will only have half of the genetic material. They have to join with an egg or an ovum to create the full DNA picture. All right. So the paragraph that we are on now starts with the secondary spermatocytes undergo another division so that the original cell becomes 4 spermatids that soon develop into mature sperm cells or spermatozoa. Start highlighting here. The soft connective tissue between these seminiferous tubules contains special groups of cells known as the interstitial cells of Leydig, which produce the male sex hormone testosterone. Because the testes produce both sperm and testosterone, they are considered both endocrine, without ducts, and exocrine, with duct glands. So testes are both endocrine and exocrine because they both use ducts and also they don't use ducts. The testosterone is put directly into the bloodstream. The cells have to take a tube to get out. So the tube makes it an exocrine gland. Now, continue highlighting. Testosterone is essential to the development of male sexual characteristics, including body hair, a masculine voice, sex organs, and sperm production. Pause highlighting. Spermatozoa are tiny, detached cells. So they swim around freely. They are not locked in place like all your other cells are. They are egg-shaped, and they are equipped with a tail that enables them to be motile or to swim. Motile means they can move, but the kind of movement that they use is they swim. Highlight. Of the millions of spermatozoa released during ejaculation, only one fertilizes the reproductive cell produced by the woman. The others die within a short time. Now, I will qualify this statement with a couple of things. Number one, by and large, one sperm will fertilize one egg. But obviously that is not always the case because twins are a thing. Twins come in two flavors, identical and fraternal. Identical twins, we have one egg and one sperm. They join together to produce a zygote, but the zygote during its reproductive process splits in two, and each one of those continues on. That is an identical twin. Genetically, they are identical. They both came from the same egg. They came from the same sperm, but this thing split in two, and now the two continue developing into two individual babies. These babies will be identical, visually and genetically. On the other hand, we are assuming that a woman is only releasing one egg at a time. Many times, women could release 2 or 3 eggs at the same time. This is where fraternal twins come into play. Many times, fraternal twins will be mixed sexes, so you'll have a boy and a girl that are both in there together. They are born at the same time. These guys are normal brother and sister, right? They just happen to be born at the same time and held in the womb at the same time. We call them womb mates. But these guys are not genetically identical. They are only as related to each other as any other normal pair of siblings would be, which is exactly half. So we are assuming that everything is going according to plan. One egg, one sperm equals one baby. But again, with biology, things don't always go according to plan. Sometimes you get identical twins when one egg splits. Sometimes you get fraternal twins when 2 eggs are fertilized at the same time. So, the male reproductive system includes a duct system, tubes that transport the spermatozoa from the testes to the outside of the body. The epididymis, highlight this, the epididymis located in the scrotum receives sperm from the testes and stores the sperm until it becomes fully mature. So this is like a daycare for your sperm. This tube extends upward to become either the left
Hey, Dave, I think your mic's off.
Thank you. I didn't even notice that. So, sorry about that. My internet crapped out and it kicked me out. I had to get back in. Okay, so the epididymis is located in the scrotum. It receives sperm from the testes and stores the sperm until it becomes fully mature. The epididymis extends upward to become either the left or right vas deferens. This continues through a small canal behind the abdominal wall and behind the urinary bladder. The sperm collects in the vas deferens until it is expelled from the body. The vas deferens join with the ducts from the seminal vesicles to form the ejaculatory ducts. These two ducts enter the prostate gland, where they empty into the urethra. So the sperm are cells, those little cells with a tail, and they swim. The semen is the fluid through which they swim, right? So when you release sperm, you're not just releasing cells, you're releasing cells in a fluid that they're swimming in. The testes produce the sperm, the prostate produces the semen. Prostate can become problematic in men as we age. It tends to get inflamed. This is why older guys have to get their prostate checked. The only real way to do that is to put on a glove and you stick your fingers in through the back door and you press, you go in and press down toward the pelvic floor and you'll feel a swelling. It's about the size of a walnut. If it becomes inflamed, however, this can pose a problem because the tubes that your sperm are carried through and the tube that your urine is carried through, those tubes run through the prostate, right through it. So when the prostate swells up, it can pinch off those tubes, which reduces the ability of your body to get rid or to ejaculate sperm, so it can cause impotence. But it also is pinching off your urinary bladder, which you feel like you have to pee. So you stand there at the toilet and you're like holding your junk and you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and you just get like a little dribble because the tube, the garden hose, has been pinched off by this swollen prostate. It's fun times, fun times. Now, the glands of the male reproductive system produce secretions that combine with the sperm to form semen, which is excreted from the body during ejaculation. Highlight. Seminal vesicles are two convoluted glandular tubes located on each side of the prostate that produce a nutritious fluid that is excreted into the ejaculatory ducts at the time of emission. Pause highlighting there. So these secretions within semen will contain simple sugars for fuel, for energy, mucus, a hormone called prostaglandin, and other substances that help nourish, protect, and aid the sperm as it travels into the female reproductive system. The seminal fluid forms most of the semen when ejaculated. Semen is very slightly on the alkaline side of the pH scale because the interior of the vagina is slightly on the acidic side. So by having a slightly alkaline semen, it allows the sperm to survive a little bit longer once they are inside of the female reproductive system, because the female reproductive system is not on board with this. It is doing whatever it can to kill the sperm. So the sperm need every edge that they can to survive it so they can make it to the ovum and penetrate it to create a zygote, and reproduction can happen. So the prostate gland lies below the urinary bladder, inferior to the urinary bladder, and it surrounds the first part of the urethra. The prostate gland secretes an alkaline fluid that enhances the sperm's motility, their ability to swim. The fluid also neutralizes the acidic vaginal secretions, thereby protecting the sperm and increasing its chances of reaching and fertilizing the ovum. Ducts from the prostate gland enter the ejaculatory ducts. The prostate gland is supplied with muscular tissue that reflexively contracts during ejaculation. Now, you do not need to know this, but this is a really fun and funny fact, and I will share this with you, and I promise you on my life, I am not making this up. The muscle that is responsible for ejaculation, the muscle that squeezes the prostate to ejaculate sperm, I am not making this up, is called the cremaster muscle. C-R-E-M-A-S-T-E-R, cremaster muscle. Remember, guys, I did not name these structures. I am just reporting the news. So, next paragraph, I want you to highlight the Cowper's glands, also known as the bulbourethral glands, are two pea-sized glands located beneath the prostate. They are mucus-producing glands that serve to lubricate the urethra, to make sure that everything can slip and slide easily on its way out. The urethra serves to convey urine from the bladder and carry reproductive cells and secretions out of the body. So for men, urine and reproductive fluids share the same tube as they come out. This is not the case for women. Women have one tube for urination and one tube for birth canal, menstruation, all that fun stuff. The penis is the male organ of copulation. Copulation is sex, consisting of erectile tissue that can become engorged with blood and erect to deposit sperm-containing semen deep within the woman's vagina. Now, any questions before we move on? Because I'm going to move swiftly along here.
Nope.
All right, the female reproductive system, highlight. The functions of the female reproductive system are to produce ova and female hormones, to receive the sperm during the sex act, and to carry the growing fetus during pregnancy. Pause highlighting. The reproductive system in females includes 2 ovaries, 2 fallopian tubes, also known as oviducts or egg tubes, that connect the ovaries to the next organ, a uterus, 1 uterus, a vagina, and the vulva or external genitalia. So when we say vulva, what we mean is the external stuff, right? So when you look at the female body, what you see on the outside, that is the vulva. That is not the vagina. The vagina is inside, and it is a tube inside of them. Everything you see on the outside is a vulva. Highlight, the vulva forms the external part of the female reproductive system. It includes the outer lips called the labia majora and the inner smaller lips called the labia minora. The word labia literally means lip. So when we get to, for example, when we're talking about the mouth, we talk about the superior labia and the inferior labia. We're just talking about lips here. All right, stop highlighting there. The clitoris is a small sensitive body part of erectile tissue, very similar to the penis, that is located at the anterior junction of the labia. The mons pubis, or pubic mound, is a pad of fatty tissue over the pubic symphysis. So it'll be located posterior to where your pubic hair is. The female internal organs highlight the vagina is a muscular tube or canal leading from the vulva opening to the cervix and is the lower part of the birth canal. The vagina is the organ that receives the penis and the ejaculated semen during sexual intercourse. Near the vestibule of the vagina are mucus-producing glands called Bartholin's glands. These serve to lubricate. Next paragraph, highlight. The uterus is a pear-shaped muscular organ consisting of an upper portion, the body, and the cervix or neck. So just like we said, the cervical region is the neck. In females, the uterus is vaguely shaped like this. So this would be the body. The neck of the uterus is the cervix. This is where cervical cancer happens. So the cervix is normally blocked off, and then we have another tube. This is the birth canal or the vagina. And then outside the vagina, we have the external genitalia. So you cannot just take a probe or something and just go straight into the uterus. You've got to make it through the vagina, through the opening in the cervix, which usually has to be manually opened using, a speculum. It looks like a big metal duck beak. They stick it in and they open it up. And it opens up the cervix so that we can get into the uterus. That is how they will do procedures like the implantation of an IUD, form of birth control. This is how they do pap smears. Gynecologists do this all the time. All right, moving right along. The uterine cavity is small and narrow except during pregnancy when it expands to accommodate the fetus and a large amount of fluid. So when you got a baby in here, this uterus expands to include the entire baby. So you think about how big a baby is when it comes out, that uterus swells to like the size of a basketball, sometimes a little bit larger. But when there is no baby in there, it is not going to stay that big. It's going to be much smaller, usually about the size of a fist or so. It's only going to expand when it has to. Now, moving on, I want you to start highlighting the oviducts, or fallopian tubes, are the egg-carrying tubes of the female reproductive system. They extend from the uterus to the ovaries. Now, the ovaries are going to be held on the sides, and then we have two fallopian tubes, or oviducts. So when an ovary discharges a mature ovum, it will come out of the ovary, travel through the fallopian tube, and enter the uterus. It will hang out here until it is fertilized, in which case, awesome. Right? The fertilized ovum will then embed itself in the wall of the uterus and trigger the pregnancy. However, more often than not, pregnancy does not occur, in which case the uterus has been preparing its inner lining, preparing for pregnancy, right? We've increasing vasculature, blood flow. We're adding layers of tissue to make sure there's nutrients for the fertilized egg to live off of. But if there is no fertilization, right, the woman did not get pregnant this month, then we spent all this time decorating the room, the party did not arrive, so we got to tear all the decorations down. This lining that has been produced on the inside of the ovum, on the inside of the uterus, as well as the unfertilized ovum, they all get stripped and dumped. That is menstruation. So every month, right, we prepare the wall of the uterus for implantation, but if implantation doesn't happen, we tear the lining down, we flush it out of the system. This is the woman's menstrual cycle every month. All right, so highlight. The oviducts, also called fallopian tubes, are the egg-carrying tubes of the female reproductive system. They extend from the uterus to the ovaries. The ovaries, or the female gonads, are a pair of glandular organs located within the pelvic area. Stop highlighting there. The ovaries, just like the testes, perform two functions. Number one, they produce the ovum, the sex cells. Also, they produce female sex hormones, namely estrogen and progesterone. The ovum is the egg cell that is capable of being fertilized by a spermatozoa and will develop into a new life. During each menstrual cycle, this is the regularly recurring series of changes that take place in the ovaries, uterus, and other related structures, a follicle develops into the ovary and produces estrogen as an ovum matures. Usually only one follicle matures each cycle, which is about every 28 days. Highlight ovulation is the discharge of a mature ovum from the follicle of the ovary. Stop highlighting there. A hormone from the pituitary gland in your brain that is called luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone produced in your pituitary gland goes into the bloodstream and it transforms the follicle in the ovary into the corpus luteum, literally the white body. This is a yellowish, I know we said white, but just, we got to dime out about it, okay? The corpus luteum is a yellowish endocrine body formed in the ruptured follicle of the ovary that produces estrogen and progesterone. These hormones promote the lining of the uterus to thicken in preparation to receive the egg should it be fertilized. Estrogen also controls the development of secondary sexual characteristics like breast development and the female body contours. As women sexually mature, right, they develop breasts, but also the waist gets pulled in, which gives them that hourglass shape. Those body changes, as well as secondary changes like the production of body hair, just like testosterone in men gives men the deeper voice, the broad shoulders, the broad V-shaped torso. I think I said deepening voice, the body hair, all that stuff. Those are secondary sex characteristics. In females, the secondary sex characteristics are also under the control of a hormone, but in their case, it is estrogen, whereas in men, it is testosterone. Moving right along. The ovum is carried into the fimbriated ends of the oviducts by the action of cilia, which produce a current in the peritoneal fluid. This is a really weird way of describing it. So let me just try my best here. Okay. So here we have an ovary, which is releasing an egg, and the egg is going to be pulled into the opening of the fallopian tube. The ends of the fallopian tubes, all these little spangles here, has a bunch of little, I don't want to say hair-like, they're not like hairs, but they have little appendages. And these little appendages kind of move like this. The idea is moving like this, all of this stuff is filled with fluid, right? Peritoneal fluid. So as they move, they create a current, which pulls the fluid into the fallopian tube. So as the ovary discharges an egg, it gets caught in that current and pulled, following the current created by these appendages, pulled into the fallopian tube. Once it's in the tube, it's transported down into the uterus. So these little projections that are doing their thing, this is what they're talking about when they say it's, I lost my place, where did it go? Fimbriated. There it is. Sorry, I lost my place. The ovum is carried into the fimbriated ends of the oviducts, these projections, right, by the action of cilia, which produce a current in the peritoneal fluid. The ovum travels down the oviduct toward the uterus, and if it is fertilized by a sperm cell, pregnancy results. If the ovum is not fertilized, then that built up lining in the uterus that has been preparing for pregnancy, it sloughs off, right? So it detaches and gets flushed. It is expelled along with menstrual blood secretions and that one ovum. Next page. Starting at the very top, highlight. Menstruation is the cyclic physiologic uterine bleeding that normally occurs at about 4-week intervals, except during pregnancy, except when it does, because some women continue to have periods into pregnancy, but generally speaking, the periods stop during pregnancy. During the reproductive period of the human female. Stop highlighting there. Menstruation begins at puberty and continues until menopause, which occurs somewhere between the ages of 45 and 55. Menopause is the physiologic cessation of the menstrual cycle and therefore is the end of the childbearing years. Now, reproductive cycles differ between men and women. Women are born with all of the eggs they will ever have. The problem is the eggs are not mature. They mature based on hormonal signals, and they mature one egg at a time, one egg every month. One egg becomes fertile. But they are born with all the eggs they will ever have, millions and millions of immature ova in their ovaries. So they are born with everything they will have. Menstruation begins at puberty, and this is a word that I want you to know. It's not in your book, but write it in your book. I want you to know this. Menarche, M-E-N-A-R-C-H-E. Menarche is their first menstrual cycle. You only have one. The first one usually happens somewhere between 10 and 14 years of age, but your first period is known as menarche. This signals the beginning of a woman's reproductive years. She will continue to have these menstrual cycles every 28 days, every month for the rest of her adult life, until about the age of 45 to 55. It's different for every woman, but once a woman hits menopause, the menstrual cycle ceases. They are no longer able to conceive a child. They cannot get pregnant anymore. They do not have periods anymore. It works a little bit differently for men. Men are born with immature testes, so they do not produce any sperm at all. Sperm production begins in puberty. So as men go into puberty, again, somewhere between the ages of 10 to 14, somewhere around in there, the testes will begin to produce sperm as they also begin to produce testosterone, which triggers all the changes of puberty, right? You got the body hair, the weird growth patterns, the weirdness in your voice, like all that weird stuff. Fun times. But once a male is sexually mature, he will continue producing sperm throughout the rest of his life, right? Women can only get pregnant into their 40s and 50s, and then they can't anymore. A male can father children right up until the day he dies of old age. Like the day before you croak at 102 years old, you could pop out a bunch of kids. Now, sperm does degrade over time, so the kids may not be super healthy, but you are capable of having a child, of impregnating a woman all the way up until you die. Never stops. All right. Now, make sure you have this word in your book somewhere. You wrote it down. The definition of menarche is a woman's first menstrual cycle, just the first one. First time it happens. That is menarche. The second time it happens, it's just a normal menstrual cycle. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is pregnancy. Now, we could seriously go on for months talking about pregnancy. The field of embryology is vast and fascinating, but not in our scope of practice. So we're going to cut this huge topic of pregnancy down to like 4 paragraphs. So we are cutting out a lot of information, but as massage therapists, this is what we need to know in order to do our jobs. Pregnancy is also known as gestation. Gestation is the physiological condition that occurs from the time an ovum is fertilized until childbirth. So from fertilization to birth, gestation or pregnancy. During pregnancy, the fertilized egg develops in the mother's uterus or womb. The uterus is the womb. From a single cell, right? Remember, it was called a zygote. A fertilized egg is one cell called a zygote. The zygote will then split and divide and over again in a very regular pattern through many stages until it becomes a full-term infant. The duration of pregnancy in women is approximately 280 days or 40 weeks or 9 months. Let me tell you, it's 9 months. It's really like 10 months, but whatever. Embryonic development begins at conception. So the embryo begins development as soon as the sperm and egg come together. It is now officially a cell. Now, I want to make a distinction. I did not say human. I said it is a cell. One cell. That is all I'm saying. It's a cell as soon as it is fertilized. Embryonic development begins at conception with the fertilization of the ovum by the sperm, which usually takes place within the first 3 days after ovulation and the first few hours after copulation. Copulation is the sex act. So the egg becomes fertilized usually within a few hours after the sex act. It doesn't happen immediately. Of the millions of sperm that are deposited within the vagina, only several hundred will reach the uterus, and of those few hundred, only one will go on to fertilize the ovum. After fertilization, the developing zygote travels down the fallopian tubes and becomes embedded in the uterine wall. The developing form first receives nourishment from the uterine fluids, and then it will develop a placenta, which is a new organ that is fully created with each pregnancy. It is created and then it is expelled during childbirth. If a woman gets pregnant again, she grows an entirely new placenta. The placenta is an organ which serves as the interface between the mother and child's body. It sits usually on the superior and posterior aspect of the uterus, and it doesn't look like, it looks like a big bloody purple water balloon with really fat blood vessels running through it. It doesn't really look at much of anything. But the placenta has this large cord coming off of it, right? That's the umbilical cord that would plug into the baby's belly button. So that is the way that nutrients and wastes are able to be transferred from the baby to the mother, is through this interface known as the placenta. Placentas are entirely grown per pregnancy. So if you don't know much about childbirth, the woman goes to the hospital and she push, boom, you got a baby, but you're not done yet, right? All the Lifetime movies cut straight to the woman like holding her baby. No, after you push out the baby, you got to keep pushing because they remove the placenta. Whole placenta comes out. You no longer have one until you get pregnant again, and then an entirely new placenta is grown and developed. From about the 12th week, I skipped. After fertilization, the developing zygote travels down the fallopian tubes and becomes embedded in the uterine wall. The developing form first receives nourishment from the uterine fluids and then from the wall of the uterus as the placenta develops. From about the 12th week, the developing fetus, enclosed in a fluid-filled amniotic sac with its own circulatory system, the baby has its own heart and blood vessels and everything, will receive nourishment and dispose of its wastes by way of the placenta. So the baby, remember, it's that umbilical cord is plugged into its belly. So babies don't poop through the usual path. They poop out of their umbilical cord. And then the mother's body absorbs that waste products and her kidneys filter it out. The mother's blood and the blood of the fetus never interchange. That is an important fact. Baby and mommy never share blood. Those systems are kept entirely separated from each other. So if a woman, for example, if a woman has HIV and she has a baby in her belly, the baby does not have HIV. Normally when babies contract HIV, it's during childbirth, like during the birth when the baby's smeared with all the vaginal fluids. We can put women on medications and then do a C-section, and the baby can be born without contracting HIV. That is a possibility nowadays. But babies and mommy's blood never mixes. It shouldn't mix. All right, moving on to the next paragraph, I do want you to highlight the first sentence. From the beginning of the 3rd month of pregnancy until birth, the developing child is called a fetus. Before that, it is called an embryo. Embryo for the first 3 months, and after month 3, it is now a fetus. Once the fetus is born, it is now an infant. During pregnancy, the mother's metabolism changes because of the demands made on her body systems. Her lungs must provide more oxygen, her heart has to pump more blood, her kidneys must excrete nitrogenous wastes from the fetus and the mother's bodies, right? So her kidneys are filtering for 2 now. Her lungs are breathing for 2. Her heart is pumping for 2. So there's extra stress placed on her body. Also, on top of all of that, all of her organs have to shift positions around in her because as the baby grows and the uterus expands, her abdominal organs and all the other stuff she's got going on, all that stuff has to move out of the way to accommodate the growing baby. So not only is everybody having to play musical chairs in her body, but they're also having to work harder. Pregnancy is no joke, you guys. During pregnancy, the mother needs proper nutrition and to provide for the growth of her baby, as well as to maintain the health of all of her organs as her body prepares for labor and birth. After childbirth, the mother should maintain her health and that of her child by attention to nutritional needs and by specific exercises to tone and strengthen her muscles. So there you have it, guys. That was the human reproductive system. Well, that is all the information that I have. The next question that I have is, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, Dave. You did a good lecture.
Well, thanks. You know how to get in touch with me. If you do have any questions, I'm always here for you. But if there are no more questions, that has been the urinary and reproductive system. Ta-da! All right, sir. Well, we are done for the day. Wash your hands, be safe, and I will see you next week.
All right. Bye.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Of course.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, guys.